I was 23 the first time I paid my brother's rent. I told myself it was a one-time thing. I was wrong. That was the beginning of a pattern that would take me 4 years, one wedding, and one very public humiliation to finally see clearly. My name is Madeleine Tremblay. I grew up in Kitchener, Ontario, the older of two kids. And from the time I was old enough to hold a part-time job, I understood that being responsible was something I wore like a second skin. My brother Olivier is 3 years younger than me. He's charming, he's funny, and he has always known exactly how to make a room feel like it revolves around him. Growing up, I loved that about him. I thought it was a gift. It took me a long time to understand that what I thought was his gift was actually being paid for by me. Our parents divorced when I was 15, and Olivier was 12. Our mother, who we always called Maman even though we'd grown up in an English-speaking neighborhood, stayed in the house in Kitchener. Our father moved to Calgary. He remarried within 2 years and started a new family. He sent birthday cards until he stopped sending birthday cards, which was around the time Olivier turned 16 and I turned 19. After that, we didn't hear from him much. So it was the three of us, Maman, Olivier, and me, and from early on, the unspoken rule was that I was the one who held things together. I don't say that to make myself sound like a hero. I say it because it's the truth, and the truth matters here. I graduated from the University of Waterloo with a degree in accounting at 22. I had a full-time job lined up before I even walked across the stage. I moved into a one-bedroom apartment in downtown Kitchener, about a 15-minute drive from the house where Maman still lived. I paid my own rent, my own groceries, my own phone bill. I was proud of that. I was building something, quietly and carefully, the way I had always done everything. Olivier, meanwhile, had started a college program in digital media in Hamilton. He moved into a shared house with 3 other guys and called me in October of his first year to say his roommates were terrible and he needed to find somewhere else to live. He asked if I could help with a deposit on a new place. Just a loan, he said. Just until his student loan came through. I transferred him $800 that same night. He never paid it back. But he also never asked for that specific amount again in that specific way, so somehow I told myself the ledger was still roughly balanced. That is how these things work, I've come to understand. It never starts with a big ask. It starts with something that feels reasonable. Something you can justify to yourself late at night when you're looking at your bank account and trying to feel okay about it. And then the next ask comes. And because you already said yes once, the bar for saying yes again is lower. And then lower again. And before you know it, 4 years have passed, and you have been quietly subsidizing someone else's life while believing, somehow, that you were just being a good sister. By the time Olivier finished his college program and moved back to Kitchener, I had covered his phone plan for 14 months, paid a vet bill for his cat that he'd adopted without telling me, sent money for groceries 4 separate times, and fronted him a deposit on his new apartment in Kitchener when he moved back. He always had a reason. The reasons were always plausible, and Maman always backed him up. He's still finding his feet, she would say. You know how hard it is out there for young people. You were lucky, Madeleine. You've always been the strong one. I held on to that. You've always been the strong one. I wore it like a compliment. I didn't understand yet that it was a leash. Olivier got a job at a marketing firm in Kitchener not long after moving back. Entry-level, but steady. He started dating a woman named Brianna, sharp, outgoing, the kind of person who lights up when she talks about her own plans. I liked her at first. She seemed good for him. She made him more focused, more serious. Within 8 months of dating, they were engaged. The engagement party was at Maman's house. There were maybe 30 people there, aunts, cousins, Brianna's family, neighbors. I brought wine and flowers and a card with a check inside because I genuinely wanted to celebrate them. Olivier hugged me at the door and called me his best sister, which he had been calling me since childhood, since I was his only sister, and I had always laughed at it. I laughed at it that night too. The wedding was set for the following September. They chose a venue outside of Guelph, a converted barn property with a garden ceremony space. It was beautiful. It cost, as I would later learn in pieces, considerably more than either of them had saved. In March of that year, about 6 months before the wedding, Olivier called me on a Sunday evening. Brianna was with him. They put me on speaker. They had already booked the venue, chosen the catering, hired the photographer. Then Olivier told me they were a little short. Not a lot, he said. Just a gap in the budget. Just enough to cover the florist and the DJ and the rehearsal dinner. He told me the number. It was $4,200. I remember sitting at my kitchen table in Kitchener, looking at the window above my sink, watching the rain run down the glass in thin lines. I remember thinking, very clearly, that I should say no. I remember thinking that I had a savings goal, that I was trying to put money away toward a down payment, that $4,000 was not a small amount of money, that I had already given so much. I remember all of that going through my head in about 4 seconds. Then, I heard Brianna's voice say, quietly, "We really wouldn't ask if we didn't have to." And I said yes. I told myself this was different. This was a wedding. This was a once-in-a-lifetime event. After this, I told myself, things would be different. They would be settled. They would be building their life together, and the asking would stop. I transferred the money in 2 installments over the next 2 weeks. Olivier texted me a thumbs-up emoji both times. I want to be clear about something. I am not telling this story to make my brother sound like a monster. He is not a monster. He is someone who learned, very early, that the path of least resistance in our family was to let me carry things, and Maman reinforced that every single time. She would tell him he was still young, still finding his way, that Madeleine understood, that Madeleine had always been mature for her age. The system had 2 parts, and they both played their roles perfectly. The wedding was on the 2nd Saturday in September. The property outside Guelph was, genuinely, stunning. There was a late afternoon ceremony in the garden, with white chairs set out on the grass and flowers everywhere. I wore a navy dress I had bought specifically for the day. I did my hair. I drove out from Kitchener on my own. During the cocktail hour, Brianna's mother introduced me to several people as Olivier's sister, which I am. That's fine. At one point, her aunt asked me if I was in the wedding party, and I said no, and there was a small pause. And the aunt said, "Oh, of course," in a tone that suggested she wasn't quite sure what the right response was. I wasn't in the wedding party. I hadn't been asked. Brianna had 4 bridesmaids, 2 of her friends from university, her younger sister, and Olivier's childhood friend's girlfriend, a woman I had met twice. When the wedding party had been announced months earlier, I had pushed down the sting of it and told myself it was Brianna's wedding, Brianna's choices, and it wasn't about me. I still believed that at the cocktail hour. I was still telling myself that. Then came the speeches. The reception was inside the barn venue, which had been done up beautifully, string lights, long wooden tables, flower arrangements that I recognized as part of the budget I had helped fill. Olivier and Brianna sat at the head table with their wedding party. Maman sat at a family table near the front. I was at a table slightly further back, between one of our cousins and a friend of Brianna's family who I had never met. Brianna's father spoke first, then her maid of honor, then the best man, Olivier's friend from university, who told 3 stories about Olivier that got progressively funnier and ended with everyone laughing and raising their glasses. Then it was time for Olivier's speech. He stood up and tapped his glass and the room went quiet. He spoke for about 7 minutes. He talked about meeting Brianna. He talked about the moment he knew she was the person he wanted to spend his life with. He talked about her kindness, her strength, her laugh. It was genuinely sweet. The room was warm. Then he thanked people. He thanked Brianna's parents for welcoming him into their family. He thanked his best man. He thanked the wedding party. He thanked the guests for traveling to be there. He said, and I remember this clearly, this day wouldn't have been possible without the support of so many people who believed in us. He looked toward Maman's table. He said, "Maman, thank you for everything, for always being there." And then he raised his glass and said, "To Brianna." That was the end of the speech. I sat at my table, and I held my glass up with everyone else, and I smiled. I know I smiled because our cousin beside me smiled back at me and clinked her glass against mine. The room was full of the sound of people celebrating. The string lights were warm above us. Olivier and Brianna were kissing at the head table while everyone cheered. I kept smiling all the way through dinner. I excused myself once to go to the restroom, and I stood at the sink for a moment and looked at myself in the mirror. I wasn't crying. I noticed that. I thought I might be about to cry, but I wasn't. What I felt wasn't quite sadness. It was something more like clarity, cold and clean, like the first real breath of air you take when you walk outside in January. I thought about the $800 4 years ago. The phone plan, the vet bill, the groceries, the deposits, the $4,200 I had transferred in 2 installments, both acknowledged with a thumbs up. I thought about, this day wouldn't have been possible without the support of so many people who believed in us. And I thought, I believed in you. I paid for the flowers you're sitting next to, and the music that played while you walked down the aisle, and the dinner that's currently on your plate. I believed in you with my savings account, and my silence, and 4 years of saying yes every single time you asked. I went back to my table. I stayed until the cake was cut. I hugged Olivier and Brianna, and told them it was a beautiful day. Olivier said I looked great, and that he was glad I was there. I said I was glad too. Maman hugged me at the end of the night and said, "It was perfect, wasn't it?" I said, "It was beautiful." I drove back to Kitchener alone. It was a clear night, and the highway was quiet. I had the radio on low, but I wasn't really listening to it. I was thinking, I didn't make any dramatic decisions that night. I didn't call anyone. I didn't send any messages. I went home and I made tea, and I sat at my kitchen table and I thought, very carefully, about what I was going to do. Over the next few weeks, I started paying attention in a way I hadn't allowed myself to before. I looked at my bank statements, and I added things up, not to punish myself or anyone else, just to see clearly. The total number, when I put it all together, was significant. Not catastrophic, but significant. More than a year of what my savings goal would have been if I had been directing that money toward myself instead. I thought about what I wanted my life to look like. I was 27. I had a good job. I was good at my job. I had been so focused on holding other people's lives together that I had never fully asked myself what I actually wanted to build for my own. I decided to stop. Not dramatically. Not with an announcement or a confrontation. I just decided that the next time someone asked me for money, my brother, my mother, anyone, I was going to say no. Kindly, clearly, and without a lengthy explanation. Just no. I didn't have to wait long. 3 weeks after the wedding, Olivier texted me. He and Brianna had gone on their honeymoon to Portugal, a trip I realized as I looked back at the timeline, indirectly funded through the florist and DJ money that freed up other parts of their budget. He was back now, first week of October, and he had a situation. He called me instead of texting, which he usually did when the ask was bigger. The situation, he explained, was that they had come back from the honeymoon to a notice from their landlord. Their building was being sold, and their unit had been renovated. The new rent was going up by $600 a month. They had until the end of November to either sign the new lease or find somewhere else. Finding somewhere else meant first and last month's rent on a new place, which they didn't have liquid right now, not with the wedding costs and the honeymoon. He was asking for $3,000. I let him finish. Then I said, "I can't do that, Olivier." There was a pause. He said, "What do you mean?" I said, "I mean I'm not able to lend you the money. I'm sorry you're in a tough spot." Another pause. Longer this time. He said, "Maddie, this is serious. We don't have anywhere to go." I said, "I understand, but I can't help financially right now. You'll need to look at other options." He went quiet for a moment, and then he said something I wasn't expecting. He said, "After everything Maman has done for you?" I didn't respond to that. I just said, "I hope you find a solution. Take care, Olivier." And I ended the call. I sat with the discomfort of that for a few minutes. It wasn't easy. Saying no to someone you love is not easy, and I want to be honest about that. But underneath the discomfort, there was something else, that same cold, clean feeling I had felt in the mirror at the wedding. Something settling into place. Within an hour, my phone rang again. It was Maman. I knew it would be. She started by asking how I was, which she rarely did when she called. Then she moved quickly to Olivier's situation, which she described as a crisis. She said he and Brianna were beside themselves. She said she didn't have money to help them herself. She said she knew it was a lot to ask. But family helped family. And hadn't I always understood that? I said, Maman, I've been helping for a long time. I need to focus on my own finances for a while. She said, Your own finances are fine, Madeleine. You have a good job. Olivier is struggling. I said, I know, but this isn't something I can take on. Her voice changed then. She said, I don't understand you sometimes. You have so much, and you're sitting on it while your brother needs help. What kind of sister does that? I said, The kind who has limits, Maman. I love you. I'll talk to you soon. I hung up. She called back twice that evening. I didn't answer. She left a voicemail the second time. I listened to it the next morning. It was more of the same, with an added note that she had raised me to be generous and she didn't know where that person had gone. I deleted the voicemail and made myself a coffee and went to work. Over the next 2 weeks, the calls came with some regularity. Olivier called twice more. Brianna called once, which she had never done before, and asked if there was some kind of misunderstanding. I told her there wasn't. Our cousin, the one who had sat beside me at the wedding, texted me to say she'd heard things were tense and to check in. I appreciated that. I didn't explain myself to anyone beyond what I had already said. I kept my responses short and consistent. I'm not in a position to help financially right now. I hope you find a solution. That was it. I said it calmly every time. They found another apartment. I heard this through our cousin in late October, a place in a neighborhood slightly further out, smaller, but manageable. They had apparently borrowed money from Brianna's parents for the deposit. I was glad they'd found something. I genuinely was. In November, things went quiet. Maman stopped calling every few days. Olivier texted me on my birthday with a happy birthday message and nothing else. I texted back thank you and meant it. Things were not resolved between us, but they were quiet, and I chose to sit with the quiet instead of filling it. What I did with that quiet was this. I opened a high-interest savings account and started directing money into it every 2 weeks on payday. I looked into first-time homebuyer programs in Ontario. I started making appointments with a mortgage specialist at my bank. I began to understand, in a concrete way, what the last 4 years might have looked like if I had been building steadily for myself instead. I don't say this to be bitter. I say it because seeing it clearly was important. It helped me understand that I wasn't a victim of some elaborate scheme. I was a participant in a pattern I had kept choosing, and once I chose differently, the pattern broke. It was that simple and that hard at the same time. By December, I had more in savings than I'd had at any point since I'd started working. Not a dramatic amount, but mine. Christmas that year was the first one in a long time where I didn't feel the weight of everyone else's expectations on me. I spent it quietly dinner with a close friend from university and her husband, then a long video call with my father's sister, my aunt in Vancouver who had always been steady and kind and someone I'd let myself lose touch with over the years. We talked for almost 2 hours. She told me she was proud of me. I told her I was figuring things out. She said that was the same thing. Maman called on Christmas afternoon. She was polite. The conversation was brief. She asked if I was coming to New Year's at her place, and I said I had plans with friends. She said okay. She didn't push. I think she understood, on some level, that something had shifted. Not as a punishment or an ultimatum, just as a reality. The person I had been, the one who could always be called upon and would always say yes, had made a different choice. And that choice was holding. In January, my mortgage specialist told me I was on track to be in a position to make an offer on a property by the end of the year, depending on the market. I sat with that information for a long time after the meeting, in my car in the parking lot of the bank branch on King Street, the engine running and the heat on, the gray January sky low above the city. I thought about the night 4 years ago when I had transferred $800 to my brother and told myself it was a one-time thing. I thought about the string lights at the wedding and my name not spoken in the speech. I thought about the mirror in the restroom and that cold, clean feeling. I thought about my savings account and my mortgage timeline and the apartment I might someday own and wake up in and call mine. I thought, I am 27 years old and I am just starting. And I am starting from a place that is actually mine now. That is not a small thing. That is everything. I want to say something to anyone who has ever been in a position like mine, and I know there are many of you. Because I have heard your stories. I have recognized myself in them. I have sat with the particular loneliness of being the one who holds everything together while being made to feel that needing anything for yourself is somehow selfish. You are not selfish for having limits. You are not cruel for saying no. Generosity given from fear of what happens if you stop is not generosity, it's a transaction dressed up as love. Real love does not require you to empty yourself. Real family does not ask you to fund their lives while omitting your name from the credits. Setting a boundary is not an act of war. It is an act of self-respect. And self-respect is something no one can give you and no one can take away, but you can spend years giving it away, one transfer at a time, and you can choose, on one quiet Sunday evening on the phone, to simply stop. The strongest thing I ever did was not the years I held everything together. The strongest thing I ever did was the first time I said, not anymore. If you've ever been the invisible one, the one who paid for the party and wasn't thanked at it, this story is for you. You are not invisible. You are allowed to be seen. You are allowed to build something for yourself. And it is never too late to start.